The briefing room fell silent when the mission parameters appeared on screen. 6 Navy SEALs sat forward in their chairs, studying the extraction coordinates with the practiced calm of men who'd seen everything. Then the air liaison officer cleared his throat and said the words that changed everything. Your close air support will be Warthog 2-1, call St. Phoenix. The team leader, a master chief with 17 years downrange, asked the obvious question. Phoenix, that's. The liaison nodded. Correct. Captain Vera Kowalski. The silence that followed wasn't quite disbelief, but it wasn't confidence either. One of the younger operators muttered something under his breath about hopping the Taliban wouldn't be the only problem they'd face tomorrow. The Master Chief shot him a look that could strip paint but didn't disagree out loud. They'd all heard the stories. Single mom flying the A-10, maintenance issues, close calls. The kind of reputation that followed a pilot like smoke follows fire, deserved or not. What they didn't know was that 300 miles north, in a hard stand at Bagram Airfield, Vera Kowalski was on her back beneath her aircraft with a flashlight, inspecting panel rivets that the crew chief had already signed off on twice. The A-10 Thunderbolt II loomed above her in the darkness, all angular ugliness and brutal purpose. 30 feet of titanium bathtub wrapped around a 7-barrel Gatling gun that could spit depleted uranium at 70 rounds per second. The jet's gray paint was scarred and scorched from 100 missions, and someone had stenciled a small phoenix rising from flames beneath the canopy rail. Vera ran her fingers along the edge of the lower fuselage panel, feeling for play in the fasteners. Her daughter's face flashed through her mind. Maya, 5 years old, gap-toothed smile, asking when Mommy would be home. Panels solid, Captain, the crew chief said from somewhere in the darkness. His voice carried the patient exhaustion of someone who'd already had this conversation. I know, Vera said, but she checked 3 more rivets anyway. She'd learned the hard way that solid wasn't the same as safe, and safe wasn't the same as certain. Tomorrow she'd be flying low and slow over the Korangal Valley, putting herself between ground troops and whatever hell was waiting in those mountains. The SEALs didn't have to trust her. They just had to survive. She clicked off the flashlight and slid out from under the aircraft. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the smell of jet fuel and distant cook fires. Above, the stars were sharp enough to cut. In 14 hours, she'd find out if reputation was heavier than reality. Dawn came to Bagram like a blade, clean and cold. Vera walked the pre-flight in silence, moving around the A-10 with the methodical precision of ritual. She checked control surfaces, landing gear, the massive GAU-8 cannon protruding from the nose like an accusation. Every rivet, every panel, every system that stood between her and the valley floor 3,000 feet below. The crew chief watched from a respectful distance, holding the forms she'd need to sign. His name was Garcia, 23 years old, and he treated her aircraft like his firstborn. Clean bill of health, he called out. She'll bring you home, Captain. Vera nodded but didn't speak. She was already halfway into the headspace she'd need for what came next, that place where fear lived but didn't drive, where calculation mattered more than courage. She climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit, and began the startup sequence. The twin General Electric turbofans spooled up with a rising whine that became a roar. The stick felt right in her hand, familiar as her own heartbeat. She ran through the weapons check. 11 Maverick missiles, 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders for self-defense, and 1,200 rounds of 30mm ammunition in the drum behind her seat. Enough firepower to reshape a mountainside. Tower cleared her for departure, and she taxied out into the pale morning light. The A-10 moved like a predator, low-slung and purposeful. She advanced the throttles and the jet surged forward, gathering speed until the runway fell away and she was climbing into clean air, the Hindu Kush spreading out below like broken glass. The radio crackled. Phoenix, this is Hammer 2-1 actual. We're inbound to the valley. How copy? The voice belonged to the Master Chief, all business now, whatever doubts he'd had tucked away where they wouldn't interfere with the mission. Good copy, Hammer 2-1. Phoenix is 5 minutes out. Sky's clear and I've got eyes on your smoke. She didn't mention that the left lower fuselage panel had started vibrating during takeoff, a subtle wrongness she could feel through the stick. Not critical, not yet, But there, like a word on the tip of her tongue, the valley opened below her, a slash of green between mountains that rose like teeth. She could see the village, the ridgelines, the narrow road where the convoy would be moving. And somewhere down there, 6 seals who were counting on her to keep them alive. She rolled the A-10 into a shallow bank, feeling the panel vibration increase slightly, then settle. Garcia's voice echoed in her mind, clean bill of health. She'd learned long ago that mechanics could be wrong. The sky could be wrong. The only thing she could trust completely was what the aircraft told her through her hands, and right now it was whispering a warning she couldn't quite interpret. The seals moved through the valley like ghosts, 6 shadows against the early light. Master Chief Anders kept his team tight, spacing good, weapons oriented outward in overlapping sectors. They'd infiltrated at 0300, humped 8 clicks through terrain that wanted to break ankles, and now they were 30 minutes from the objective. A compound where intel said a high-value target was sleeping off whatever passed for dreams in men who built bombs for a living. Anders keyed his radio, voice barely above a whisper. Phoenix Hammer 2-1, we're 200 meters from the compound. Request you hold north of our position, Angel 6, ready for immediate CAS if this goes sideways. Copy Hammer, Phoenix is north, maintaining altitude. I've got thermals on your position. Vera's voice came through clean and professional, no wasted words. Anders appreciated that. He'd flown with chatty pilots before, guys who needed to fill every silence with commentary like they were narrating their own highlight reel. This captain, whoever she was, seemed to understand that silence was its own kind of communication. The team moved forward. The compound materialized from the gray dawn mud walls, flat roof, a single door facing east. Standard Taliban construction, nothing special except for what intel promised was inside. Anders hand signaled the breach sequence. His number 2, a senior chief named Morrison, moved to the door with the rams. Then the world came apart. The explosion wasn't from the compound. It came from the ridgeline 300 meters west, a daisy chain of IEDs that someone had been waiting to trigger. The blast rolled down the slope like thunder, and suddenly the valley was alive with muzzle flashes from positions the SEALs hadn't identified. Anders felt something punch his plate carrier, felt Morrison go down beside him. Contact west. Contact west. Phoenix, we need guns now. He was moving even as he called it in, dragging Morrison toward the limited cover of a rock outcrop while his team returned fire. Blood on Morrison's leg, dark and spreading fast. The Taliban had known they were coming, had prepared the valley like a killing floor. Hammer 2-1 Phoenix. Copy contact west. I'm rolling in hot, guns in 20 seconds. Mark your position with IR strobe. Anders fumbled the strobe from his kit, activated it, threw it 5 meters north of their position. Above the chaos of gunfire, he heard something that sounded like salvation, the distinctive howl of an A-10's engines, pulled back into a dive that would bring the cannon to bear. Vera saw the strobe bloom in her targeting display, saw the thermal signatures scattered along the ridgeline west of the SEAL position. 37 hostiles, maybe more. She armed the GAU-8, felt the familiar shudder as the system came live. The targeting pipper settled on the ridgeline like a promise. Vera pulled the trigger, and the A-10 transformed from aircraft to weapon system. The GAU-8 roared a sound like the sky tearing itself apart. 10 30mm rounds sleeted down at 4,200 feet per second. She watched through the targeting pod as the ridgeline erupted in geysers of rock and earth, as thermal signatures winked out like candles in a wind. The A-10 shuddered around her, absorbing recoil that would have torn apart a lighter aircraft. 2-second burst. She pulled off hard left, gaining altitude, feeling the left fuselage panel vibrating harder now. Not just a whisper anymore, a shout. Hammer Phoenix, guns complete, assess. Phoenix Hammer 2-1. Anders' voice came back tight with adrenaline but steady. Good hits, good hits. 12 confirmed KIA, rest are breaking contact. You just saved our ass. Vera was already setting up for another pass, eyes scanning the valley for secondary threats. That's when she saw them 4 technical trucks, Toyota Hiluxes with mounted PKM machine guns, screaming up the valley road from the south. Reinforcements, she keyed the radio. Hammer, be advised, 4 technicals inbound from the south, 2 clicks and closing fast, engaging with Mavericks. Copy, Phoenix. We're moving to extract point Alpha. How copy? Good copy. Keep that strobe active. She selected Maverick, locked the lead technical, fired. The missile leapt from the rail with a crack and a flash, motor igniting, steering itself toward the target with electronic certainty. 3 seconds later, the technical disintegrated in a fireball that lit the valley like sunrise. She fired again, then again. 2 more trucks vaporized. The 4th tried to reverse, to flee back down the road, but she was already rolling in with the gun. The cannon spoke again, and the truck simply ceased to exist, replaced by twisted metal and smoke. The left panel was vibrating badly now, a rhythmic hammering she could feel through the entire airframe. She checked the caution lights. Nothing yet, but she knew what this meant. The fasteners were failing. Soon the panel would separate completely, and depending on where it went, it could take out her tail, her engine, her hydraulics. She could turn back. Should turn back. Declare emergency. Get the A-10 on the ground before something catastrophic happened. But down below, 6 men were running through a valley that wanted them dead, and she was the only thing standing between them and that outcome. Phoenix, Hammer. We're taking fire from the compound east side, multiple shooters. The decision made itself. Vera rolled the A-10 into a hard right turn, pointing the nose at the compound, ignoring the panel vibration that was now a steady roar transmitted through the stick. Professional assessment could wait. Right now she had a job. The compound sat in her targeting display like a problem waiting to be solved. She could see muzzle flashes from the roof, from windows, from a position behind the east wall. The SEALs were pinned down 200 meters short of their extract point, taking fire from multiple angles. Anders' voice came through strained. Phoenix, we've got 1 urgent surgical, 2 walking wounded. We need suppression on that compound or we're not making extract. Vera's hands moved through the weapon selection with practiced efficiency. The Mavericks were gone. She had the gun, and she had 2,000-pound JDAMs that would turn the compound into a crater, but those had danger-close restrictions she couldn't ignore. The SEALs were too close. Hammer, I'm coming in with the gun, danger close. I need you flat and covered in 5 seconds. Copy, danger close. We're down. She pushed the stick forward, dropping the nose, accelerating into a dive that brought the compound rushing up at her. The targeting pipper drifted across the rooftop, settled on the east wall. Her finger found the trigger. The GAU-8 opened up and she walked the rounds across the compound in a line of destruction that left nothing standing. Stone walls exploded. The roof collapsed. Bodies disappeared in clouds of dust and flying debris. 3-second burst. She pulled off hard, hauling back on the stick, feeling the A-10 groan under the G-load. That's when the left panel failed completely. She felt it go a sudden violent shudder followed by a change in the aircraft's handling that screamed wrongness. The master caution light blazed red, hydraulic pressure dropping on the number 1 system. The stick went mushy in her hand, and the A-10 started yawing left, wanting to swap ends in the sky. She stomped right rudder, fought the jet back to something resembling controlled flight, scanned the gauges. Number 1 hydraulic system dead, number 2 holding steady. She had limited control, enough to fly, maybe not enough to land safely. Phoenix, you hit, say status. Anders had heard the change in her engine note, the sudden break in the smooth pattern of her passes. I'm okay, Hammer, panel separation, hydraulic damage, I can still fly. It was technically true, she could fly, just not well. The A-10 wallowed through the sky like a boat in heavy seas, responding to her inputs with a delay that made precise maneuvering impossible. Hammer, what's your situation? Compound is neutralized. We're moving to extract. Phoenix, you need to RTB. We've got this. She almost laughed. They didn't have this. The valley was still crawling with Taliban. The extract point was exposed. And she just announced to every hostile within 10 clicks that there was a crippled American aircraft overhead, flying slow and wounded. Perfect target. 2 more technicals appeared on the valley road, racing north toward the SEAL position. Vera saw them on her targeting display, watched them closing the distance while Anders and his team ran for the extract point with Morrison on a litter between them. The math was simple and cruel. The seals couldn't outrun the trucks. The extract helo was still 12 minutes out, and she was flying an A-10 with one hydraulic system, a missing panel, and control responses that felt like stirring concrete. She keyed the radio. Hammer, 2 more technicals inbound, your 6 o'clock, 1 click. Engaging. Phoenix, negative, your hit RTB now, that's an order. Anders' voice carried the weight of command, but also something else. Concern, maybe. Recognition that what she was about to do was beyond the scope of duty and into the territory of choice. Hammer, I didn't copy your last. Say again. She rolled the A-10 into a turn that should have been crisp and became a wallowing slide through the sky. The jet fought her every input, but it turned. Always turned. That was the thing about warthogs, they were built to take damage and keep flying, built to absorb punishment that would down any other aircraft in the inventory. She lined up on the lead technical, selected gun, fired. The cannon roared, but her aim was off, rounds impacting 30 feet right of target. She corrected, fired again. This time the technical erupted in flames, tumbling end over end before crashing into a ditch. The second truck saw what happened and tried to brake to reverse, but she was already adjusting, walking rounds back toward the target with grim determination. The PKM gunner in the truck bed got his weapon oriented, started firing up at her. She could see the tracers arcing up, bright against the morning sky. Could feel impacts somewhere in the aircraft's structure, small arms fire that the titanium tub around her cockpit shrugged off like rain. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 answered. The second technical vanished in a cloud of smoke and shredded metal. Phoenix, that's good shooting. We're clear to extract point. Anders' voice had changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect or might have been the simple acknowledgement that she just saved their lives twice in 10 minutes. Vera pulled off target, gaining altitude, nursing the crippled A-10 through the sky with gentle inputs. Every control movement had to be deliberate now, thought through, compensated for. The jet wanted to roll left, wanted to drop its nose. She held it straight through sheer force of will and constant pressure on the stick. Phoenix, dust-off 17 is inbound, 3 minutes out. We're popping smoke. She saw the green smoke bloom at the extract point, saw the shapes of the SEALs in a defensive perimeter around Morrison. The extract helo came in low and fast, a Black Hawk with door gunners scanning the ridgelines. Vera orbited overhead, her crippled A-10 describing wide, gentle circles that were all she could manage with the degraded hydraulics. She watched through the targeting pod as the SEALs loaded Morrison first, then piled in themselves, the helo lifting off even as the last man's boots left the ground. Phoenix, Hammer 2-1, all souls aboard were clear. You're released. Anders paused, then added, That was damn fine flying, Captain. Damn fine. Vera keyed the mic to respond, but the number 2 hydraulic system failed before she could speak. The master caution light that had been glowing red began flashing. The stick went completely loose in her hand, no pressure, no feedback, just dead weight. The A-10 nosed over hard, accelerating into a dive that pointed her straight at the valley floor 3,000 feet below. For 3 seconds she fought it, tried to regain control through brute force, but the aircraft wasn't responding. The backup systems weren't catching. She was flying a 30,000-pound glider with the aerodynamics of a brick, and the ground was rushing up with geometric certainty. Her hand found the ejection handle between her knees. Pull it, and the rocket motor would blast her clear, the chute would deploy, and she'd float down into a valley full of Taliban who just watched her kill 40 of their friends. Pull it, and she'd leave her aircraft to crater into some farmer's field. Pull it, and Maya would have a mother who came home, her fingers wrapped around the handle. She didn't pull. Instead, she reached for the manual reversion handle, a mechanical backup system that disconnected the hydraulics entirely and gave her direct cable control of the flight surfaces. It was a system designed for getting an A-10 to an emergency landing at a prepared airfield, not for flying combat maneuvers through a mountain valley. But it was what she had. She yanked the handle. Something deep in the aircraft's belly went clunk, and suddenly she had control again. Not the smooth, hydraulic-boosted precision she was used to, but raw mechanical connection that required both hands on the stick and full body weight to move the ailerons. The A-10 was still diving, still nose down, but now when she pulled back, the nose responded. Slowly, grudgingly, but it responded. She hauled the stick into her lap, grunting with effort, feeling the blood drain from her head as the G-load built. The valley floor filled her vision, rocks, trees, the silver thread of a stream. 500 feet, 400. The nose came up. 300 feet, still descending, but the angle was flattening. 200 feet. The A-10 shuddered, stall warning, screaming, but the nose kept coming up. 100 feet. She added power, both engines spooling up, and suddenly she was climbing again, clawing back altitude with engines that refused to quit and an airframe that refused to break. The A-10 climbed like it was personal, like it had something to prove. Vieira's arms burned from the effort of controlling the jet through manual reversion, every adjustment requiring force that made her shoulders scream. She pointed the nose east, toward Bagram, toward safety, knowing she had 90 miles to cover with an aircraft that was barely flying. The radio had been silent for 30 seconds. Now it crackled to life. "Phoenix, this is Bagram Tower. We're tracking your transponder. Understand you have hydraulic failure and are in manual reversion. Say souls on board and fuel state. Bagram Phoenix, 1 soul, 3,000 pounds fuel." Her voice was steady, professional, betraying nothing of the physical effort it took to keep the aircraft airborne. "Phoenix, copy 1 soul. Crash crews are standing by. Winds are light, runway 21 is clear. You're cleared direct, unrestricted descent." "Roger, cleared direct." She didn't mention that descent was going to be the easy part. Landing was going to require precision she wasn't sure she could deliver with degraded controls. Behind her, the Korangal Valley fell away, replaced by foothills, then by the broad plain where Bagram sat like an oasis of American firepower in hostile territory. She could see it from 40 miles out, the runway, the buildings, the rows of parked aircraft. Home, or as close to home as existed in this country. She started the descent, fighting the A-10's tendency to roll left, to drop its nose too steeply. Every correction took seconds to implement, seconds to take effect. She had to think 3 moves ahead, anticipate what the aircraft would do, because by the time she felt it starting to deviate, she was already behind. 20 miles out, 10 miles. The tower called her again. "Phoenix, say approach speed. 180 knots." Faster than normal, because she didn't trust her ability to arrest a high sink rate with manual controls. Better to come in fast and eat up runway than to come in slow and not make the runway at all. "Roger, 180, Phoenix, be advised, you have foam on the runway if needed." "Negative foam. I've got this." She wasn't sure she believed it, but saying it out loud made it true, made it something she could commit to rather than something she feared. 5 miles. The runway was a gray line against brown earth. She could see the crashed trucks positioned along the taxiway, red lights flashing. Could imagine Garcia standing somewhere in the crowd, watching his aircraft limp home broken. The wheels came down, 3 solid thumps she felt more than heard. No hydraulics meant no hydraulic brakes, meant she'd be stopping with emergency brakes only. Meant this landing had to be perfect, because she wouldn't get a second chance. The runway threshold rushed toward her, and Vieira committed to the landing with a finality that left no room for doubt. Then crossed the fence at 180 knots, nose high, sink rate controlled through sheer force of will and constant pressure on the stick. She held it off, let the runway rise to meet her. The main gear touched, first a solid thump that rattled her teeth, then the nose gear, and suddenly she was on the ground with 8,000 feet of concrete ahead and only emergency brakes to stop her. She pulled the emergency brake handle, felt the wheels lock, felt the A-10 shudder and shake as it scrubbed off speed through pure friction. Smoke poured from the main gear. The crashed trucks fell in behind her, lights flashing, ready to deploy if she veered off the runway. But the jet tracked straight, bleeding velocity, fighting her every meter but slowing. 7,000 feet of runway used, 6,000. The approach end was rushing up at her, but the A-10 was down to 60 knots now, 40-20. She stopped with 300 feet of runway remaining. For a moment she just sat there, hands still locked on the stick, breathing hard. The radio crackled. Phoenix, Bagram Tower, nice job bringing her home. Crash crews are standing by. Roger, Tower. I'm shutting down on the runway. She went through the shutdown sequence with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. Master switches off, fuel cut off, batteries off. The engine spooled down into silence. The crash crews approached cautiously, foam ready, but there was no fire, no emergency beyond the aircraft's obvious damage. She popped the canopy, felt the cool morning air rush in. Garcia appeared at the base of the ladder, his face a mixture of relief and professional assessment of the damage. Captain, you okay? I'm fine. She climbed down, legs steady despite everything. Walked around to look at the damage, saw the gaping hole where the fuselage panel should have been, saw the hydraulic fluid stains, the bullet holes in the wing, the burned rubber on the main gear tires. I told you she'd bring you home, Garcia said quietly. Vera almost laughed. The looked like it had been through a shredder, looked like it should be in a scrapyard rather than parked on an active runway. But it had flown. Had kept flying when it had every reason to quit, just like she had. Yeah, she said. She did. The debriefing took 4 hours. Intelligence wanted to know about the Taliban positions, about the compound, about the technicals and the troop movements. The safety officer wanted to know about the panel failure, about her decision to continue the mission with degraded controls. Her squadron commander wanted to know why she hadn't declared an emergency and returned to base immediately. She sat across the table from Lieutenant Colonel Briggs, her squadron commander, and wondered if this conversation would end her career. Briggs was old Air Force, a fighter pilot who transitioned to A-10s late in his career and never quite gotten over the fact that he was flying a jet designed before he was born. He studied her in silence for a long moment, then glanced down at the mission report in front of him. 6 SEALs extracted safely, he said. 1 urgent surgical who's going to keep his leg because you bought him time. Estimated 42 enemy KIA. 0 friendly casualties. He looked up. And you brought a shot-up A-10 home with no hydraulics, a missing panel and battle damage that has maintenance telling me the aircraft shouldn't have been able to fly at all. Vera waited. There was more coming. She could hear it in his tone. So help me understand, Captain, why you didn't RTB immediately when you had hydraulic failure. Why you continued to engage when you were flying a crippled aircraft. Why you thought that was appropriate risk management. This was the moment. She could give him the answer he wanted, could talk about calculated risk, about making the best decision with available information, could justify it through doctrine and decision matrices, or she could tell him the truth. Because 6 men were going to die otherwise, sir. The words came out flat, without drama, just statement of fact. The extract hello was 12 minutes out. The Taliban were 3 minutes out. The math was simple. The math, Briggs repeated. He leaned back in his chair, still studying her. The math says you should have declared emergency and let those men handle their own tactical situation. With respect, sir, the math also says we don't leave people behind. That's what it says on paper. That's what we tell ourselves when we talk about what makes us different. She met his eyes. I could have left. My aircraft would have crashed on some farmer's field because I wouldn't have made it back to base with both hydraulic systems failing. And those SEALs would be dead. Or I could stay and give them a chance. I chose the latter. Silence filled the room. Somewhere outside, another A-10 was doing pattern work, the sound of its engines a distant rumble. You have a daughter, Briggs said. It wasn't a question. Maya, she's 5. And you were willing to risk making her an orphan for 6 men you'd never met. I was willing to risk doing my job, sir. Same thing those 6 men were doing in that valley. Same thing Maya's father did when he stepped on an IED in Helmand province 3 years ago. She hadn't meant to bring David into it, but there it was. The truth that lived behind every mission she flew, behind every decision she made. I owe it to her to come home, but I also owe it to her to be someone worth coming home to. Briggs was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the mission report folder and set it aside. There's going to be a formal investigation, he said. Flight safety, maintenance, command decisions. That's standard for any incident of this magnitude. Vera nodded. She'd expected that. But off the record, Captain, speaking as someone who's been flying combat missions since before you were born. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. What you did out there was either the bravest flying I've seen in 20 years or the most reckless. Maybe both. The investigation will determine which. Yes, sir. You're grounded pending the investigation. That's non-negotiable. He held up a hand before she could protest. But I'm also recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The SEAL's Master Chief has already submitted his own recommendation, along with statements from his entire team. They're calling you the reason they're alive. Something shifted in his expression, softened slightly. For what it's worth, Captain, I would have made the same call, but I'm not the one who has to justify it to a 5-year-old girl if things had gone differently. The debriefing ended. Vera walked out into the afternoon heat, feeling the weight of the last 12 hours settling into her bones. She was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline that was rapidly depleting. But she was alive. The SEALs were alive. And somewhere in Virginia, Maya was probably in kindergarten learning letters, oblivious to the fact that her mother had just bet everything on a damaged aircraft and a slim chance. She walked to the hangar where they'd towed her A-10. The jet sat in the maintenance bay like a wounded animal, panels open, crew chief swarming over it with diagnostic equipment. Garcia saw her approaching and broke away from the group. "Captain, hell of a day." "Hell of a jet," she replied. "Is she fixable?" Garcia looked back at the A-10, at the gaping hole in the fuselage, at the damage that was still being catalogued. "Honestly, I don't know. The titanium tub protected everything critical, but we've got damage to structures I've never seen damaged before. It's going to take weeks just to assess whether she's worth repairing or if we part her out." The thought of her aircraft being reduced to spare parts hurt more than Vera expected. This wasn't just a jet. It was the machine that had kept her alive through 43 combat missions, that had responded when it had every excuse to quit, that had earned its Phoenix insignia through something more than just paint and symbolism. "Let me know," she said, "if there's anything I can do to help with the assessment." "Will do, Captain." Garcia hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I've been turning wrenches on A-10s for 8 years. Never seen one take that kind of damage and keep flying." The investigation took 11 days. 11 days of statement reviews, technical assessments, and formal interviews where serious men in flight suits asked detailed questions about her decision-making process. They examined the maintenance logs, the pre-flight inspection, the timeline of the hydraulic failures. They built a minute-by-minute reconstruction of the engagement, comparing her aircraft's telemetry data against the SEAL team's helmet camera footage and radio transcripts. On the 12th day, Vera was called back to Briggs' office. This time there were 2 other officers present, a full colonel from Air Combat Command she didn't recognize and a female major who wore intelligence insignia. The colonel gestured to a chair. "Captain Kowalski, please sit." She sat. The colonel opened a folder but didn't look at it. Instead, he looked at her. "The investigation is complete. The findings are as follows. The panel failure was due to metal fatigue in the fastener holes, not detectable during standard inspection. Your decision to continue the mission after initial hydraulic failure fell within acceptable risk parameters. Your decision to continue after the second failure." He paused. "That's where things get complicated." Vera kept her expression neutral, waiting. "Technically, you violated standing orders to RTB immediately upon loss of redundant flight control systems. That's a clear deviation from protocol." He glanced at the major, who picked up the thread. "However, the unique tactical situation, the imminent threat to ground forces, and the successful outcome create significant mitigating circumstances. The SEAL team's commander has filed formal statements indicating that without your continued support, casualties were inevitable." The colonel leaned forward. "Captain, I'm not going to tell you what you did was right. I'm also not going to tell you it was wrong. What I will tell you is that it's the kind of decision we hope our pilots never have to make, and if they do, we hope they make it the way you did, with full understanding of the consequences and a clear tactical rationale. The investigation finds no fault with your conduct," the major added. "You're cleared to return to flight status immediately." Relief flooded through Vera, but she kept it contained. "Thank you, sir." "There's more," the colonel said. "The Distinguished Flying Cross recommendation has been approved. You'll be receiving it at a ceremony next month. Additionally, your call sign has been officially recognized in the squadron records." He almost smiled. Phoenix seems particularly appropriate given the circumstances. After they dismissed her, Vera walked out into the Afghan sun and allowed herself one moment of pure emotional release, not tears, not laughter, just a long, slow breath that felt like surfacing after being underwater too long. She'd survived the mission, survived the investigation, and somehow, against odds, kept her career intact. That night she managed to get a video call through to Virginia. The connection was grainy, lag-heavy, but Maya's face filled the screen with gap-toothed joy. "Mommy, I learned a new song in school." "That's wonderful, baby. Will you sing it for me?" Maya launched into an enthusiastic, if not entirely accurate rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," complete with hand gestures. Vera watched her daughter's face, stored every detail in memory against the days when calls wouldn't be possible. When the song ended, Maya leaned close to the camera, suddenly serious. "Mommy, when are you coming home?" "Soon, baby, few more months, but I promise when I come home we're going to do something special, just you and me." "What do you want to do?" Maya's face scrunched up in thought. "Can we go to the aquarium and see the dolphins?" "Absolutely. The aquarium, the dolphins, ice cream after. Deal." "Deal." Maya's grandmother appeared in the frame behind her, gently reminding her it was bedtime. They said their goodbyes. "I love you" stretched across 7,000 miles of distance, and then the screen went dark. Vera sat in the silent room, staring at her reflection in the blank screen. Somewhere in this country, 6 men were alive because she'd chosen to stay in the fight. Somewhere in Virginia, a 5-year-old girl still had her mother because that fight had ended in survival rather than statistics. The balance felt precarious, held together by skill and luck, and an aircraft that refused to quit. 3 days later, she was back in the cockpit. Not her damaged A-10 that was still in maintenance, being evaluated for structural repairs, but another jet, tail number 780634, with clean panels and full hydraulics. Garcia had overseen the pre-flight personally, walking her through every system like it was her first day. She ran through the startup sequence, felt the engine spool up, felt the familiar weight of the stick in her hand. Tower cleared her for departure and she taxied out, rolled down the runway, lifted into the thin Afghan air. Everything felt right, solid. The controls responded with hydraulic precision, no vibrations, no warnings, just clean flight. She climbed to altitude, ran through some basic maneuvers, reacquainting herself with an A-10 that did what it was supposed to do without fighting her. It felt almost boring. Almost. Because she knew now, in a way she hadn't fully known before, that boring was a gift. That normal was something to be grateful for. That every mission that ended with wheels on the runway was a small miracle wrapped in routine. Word spread through Bagram like weather. The story of Phoenix, the single mom who'd flown a Shottup, with no hydraulics and a missing panel, who'd stayed in the fight when anyone else would have bugged out, who'd brought 6 SEALs home, alive, became the kind of tale that got told in ready rooms and chow halls. The details got embellished in the retelling. Some versions had her flying inverted to keep the damaged panel from ripping off. Others claimed she'd taken direct hits from a ZSU-23 and kept flying. The truth was dramatic enough without enhancement, but truth rarely stopped a good story. Master Chief Anders and his team rotated back to the States 10 days after the mission. Before he left, he sought her out in the squadron building. She was in the pilot's lounge, reviewing mission briefs for the next day's sorties when he knocked on the doorframe. "Captain Kowalski." "Got a minute?" She looked up, recognized him immediately despite never having met face to face. Something about the way he carried himself, the calm that came from seeing too much and surviving it all. "Master Chief, come in." He entered, closed the door behind him. For a moment he just looked at her as if confirming she was real and not some legend that had grown in his head. Then he held out his hand. "I wanted to thank you in person. What you did out there." He paused, searching for words. "My guys are writing letters to their kids because you decided to stay. Morrison still has his leg because you bought us time. That's not nothing." She shook his hand. His grip was solid, the handshake of someone who meant what he said. "I was doing my job, Master Chief, same as you." "No, ma'am, you were doing more than your job. Your job was to provide close air support and RTB when your aircraft was damaged. You stayed when you shouldn't have, when you didn't have to. He released her hand but held her gaze.